we can
Done.
start it, or else, because I don't think many people would join, except maybe
Yeah, yeah.
Kalpit join at the fag end.
Sure.
So
Even I also just doing a dual job. I am also having to close financials and मेरा पीछे
okay,
10 कॉल आ गया. Thought of I will do it tomorrow morning. I want to
okay,
just contribute that GE case, but अभी वो आके मेरा पीछे पड़ा तो काम कर रहा है वो भी.
okay.
Basically, this is a quarter start. Year so new month start. So we are all busy and also want the GST.
Yeah, it's a quarterly thing. Otherwise, it is not that. Again, the targets for GMR is always 15th, 17th board meeting is to be completed. ये
Okay.
हमने नॉर्मली प्रिपेयर ही नहीं करते ऑडिट को देके और ये फेस्टिवल का मूवमेंट में संक्रांति का फेस्टिवल के मूवमेंट में ऑडिट करा के देना है.
Right.
पीपल से नॉर्मली 10th नाउ बिकॉज ऑफ सैटरडे संडे से आज शाम तक दे दो बिकॉज संडे दे डोंट वांट टू इनडायरेक्टली डोंट वांट टू हैव स्पेंट एनी टाइम. आज तक बोले तो सो एटलीस्ट कल तक देगा तो अदरवाइज इट विल गो टू मंडे इवनिंग.
No, in any case, 10th is a date, right? Your target
Yeah,
date
but
is
10th slowly they will make it to we want it 8th. 8th is Sunday, so you have to give it again new participant after so much of time. Hi
I
Kirtan.
get key after a long
How
time.
are you? Happy New Year.
Happy New
Thank
Year
you.
to
Wish you the
you.
same.
Hope you enjoyed your year end and also the new
Yes.
year.
Much needed break. Our CEO also had come yesterday, finally has gone. So,
So nice.
hmm.
Anyway, good to
What's
see
up,
you.
everybody? Yes.
Yeah, we have almost covered everything. We are in the penultimate stage. Today's is last but one section.
Hmm.
So maybe on Tuesday we will complete everything. So after that we can have a little bit of a crash kind of a thing whereby we will make it open to people. So anybody can ask anything. Then we will discuss on those stuff
Hmm.
so that we are more prepared for the exam. So what do you perceive like exam will be?
Who, me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I think maybe probably, I don't know. I have a feeling he's not going to give us objective kind of questions because he seemed to not be sure about that. And on that willingness to pay and that is the only thing, the new thing that he taught really. So, a lot of
Absolutely.
questions on that. No,
Willingness to pay and what is that?
added value.
Suppliers. What's that?
Supplier
Opportunity cost.
opportunity cost or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is a very small concept. This we already see. If you
No, but
go
what
through,
else has he taught to ask questions? I don't know.
nay, nay.
Say
See,
what cases?
let us understand this way. In his PPT, he put everything. Whatever
Okay.
is taught by Professor Kaushik. So don't think that he will deviate from that also. He will ask those questions also.
Hmm.
So actually, there are so many interconnected concepts which the university has given us some additional materials. Like if you see what is strategy, then Porter's five forces, then your value chain and competitive advantage, then your sustainable competitive advantage, firm resources and sustainable competitive advantage. All these stuff, they are all the ones from where you get questions, not from any case study. Case study, probably they may touch, again, they may not also. We don't know. Even if they ask anything related to case study, they will ask how you apply the principles which you have learned, right? From whatever the case material they have given. Not the exact case study, but the additional material. So from there, they may ask you to, make an analysis based on those models, or they may ask something. It may be even subjective, objective as well. We don't know actually there can be a surprise. And mostly, I think it is MCQ based only. I don't think anything else.
No,
But they
I
will
mean, it
try.
had better be who has the time to sit and write essays. So,
We can easily write those essays also. See, I'll tell you why they don't prefer essay or a subjective kind of examination is. For them, it is very easy to set objective type one, and it is very easy to evaluate. Immediately, they can run a computer this one, and computer will do its job. Immediately, you get the end result immediately. So I don't think they will be going for subjective kind. For subjectivity, again, who will go through the 113 answer sheets and analyze what is correct, what is wrong, all that stuff. I don't know. So much of patience is there with them. That's what I
Hi,
personally.
Manish.
Yeah, hi Manish.
Actually, we were thinking to meet Manish today, but because of your this thing, we postponed to tomorrow.
Tomorrow you can have it in the morning at lunch, and then in the somebody can call, either to the office or residence. From there you all can attend.
We are planning together dinner with Shiva, me, Chari.
That's nice. That's in any case. I think Manish bhai to already ek peg le liya hoga by now. Kya Manish bhai?
I think you are in mute.
Manish, you are in mute. Unmute. Okay. Anyway, seems he is busy with something else. Should we start?
चलो चलो करो ऑलरेडी 10 मिनट हो गया.
Okay. So Ketki and others, Sandeep, Praveen, Suresh, can you just tell us like what distance still matters and what kind of distances they are talking about to move forward?
See, distance is
Frankly speaking, not gone to this.
uh, distance is uh, if you look at it, it's about the differences, right? What are the similarities in terms of geography, in terms of culture, in terms of language that you have in the business, entities that I mean, with the various locations that you have, more difference of these will increase the distance, right? If, for example, you deal with a country where culture is different, you have a branch or a unit in a country where culture is different, language is different, then the distance is going to be huge. So if it is the same, then it's going to be less. That's one of the indicator.
Hi Sudhir. So hi Sanjay. Now we have very strong team who can uh, do the discussion. So actually, before we start, we are
Strong team is when you are there.
pardon me.
You are alone a strong team. We only add up.
हाँ? अरे सबसे strong तुम हो भाई. चलो, let's start, right? So what do this distance still matters and why it is relevant today? This is the topic for discussion. Then we will go to the case study.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, Sudhir.
What was the thing? I mean, totally missed the question here. The
Distance still matters, right? So
distance.
yeah, why this concept is relevant now?
Yeah, it is relevant primarily because it determines the complexity of doing a business.
Right?
Okay, if there are differences which manifest in the form of distance, it will increase the complexity of doing business, and you should have different strategy for different units that you have if the distance is high. You
Right.
can't have this similar strategies across.
Right. Any others? Like Sanjay? Sanjay is the right person.
I'm the most distant at this point in time in this group.
Pardon me?
Exactly. That's why you need to
Yeah,
talk.
that's why we need your inputs.
I'm actually getting a little embarrassed to ask this what is distance in the first place. So, but
Anyway,
No, no, don't be embarrassed. That's a very
Yeah,
good question,
that is
actually.
the right question to ask, in fact.
distance is nothing but differences, right?
Right.
Typically,
Absolutely.
how what are the differences?
Yeah.
Are we homogeneous? Are we different? So that's the question. More
Right.
difference, more complexity, more difficulties.
Right.
Yeah, and
okay.
that's been divided. The entire distance has been defined using four parameters.
Right.
The cage concept. One is cultural. Example, if you go
Right.
back to Norway, Norway is a very consensus-led people country.
Okay.
Nobody would take decision. Everybody would do that decision together. US is a very individual-centric decision-making people country. So
Right.
when you are dealing between those two countries, the cultural differences are quite substantively clear. Of course, that is one aspect of culture. Language also adds to it.
Right.
Like culture, there is also other aspects like administrative distance. When there's no colonial ties, for example, India and Britain had been colonies, right?
Right.
So administratively, India and the in things the way it works in India or had worked in India for last several years is very
Right.
similar to British. But over the years, because US and India had bigger businesses, we also imbibed a lot of administrative processes similar to what US has. For example, when we go back and look at corporate governance related
Right.
standards that we have in India, a lot of that then got pulled out from Sarbanes-Oxley Act and several other acts altogether.
Right.
The third is geographical distance in terms of how physically far you are relevant for a business, right? It's not
Right.
necessary that in spite of being of the same culture and administrative processes, you may be distant by a process by virtue of which a particular product may work, a particular service may not work, whatever. And the
Right.
fourth is economic distance in terms of how economically these entities or countries are similar or different in that sense of it. And there are parameters within each of them that defines whether an organization, when they are looking to move out from their current location to locations across the globe and hence create a significant globalization, how should they identify where should they go and in what format the alliances should be? Do you want your own 100% subsidiary? Do you want to a joint venture? Do you want to do non-equity alliance? A lot of those concepts um, otherwise uh, required to analyze will work based out of this framework that helps you analyze, are these entities, are these places where they want to operate the business having significant cultural, administrative, um, geographical, and economic differences or not. That's a very basic concept.
Absolutely.
Typically, we look into and decide the next course of strategy of dealing with our business in those countries or those places altogether.
Right. Anybody else would like to add? Praveen, Udir, Ketki, Sandeep, Manish. Or should I start?
और नया बाइक तो आजकल वो क्लेम भी
Okay.
लगा
Yeah, we can start. Yeah, you can start.
Yeah. Okay.
हेलमेट भी लगा
So, so to speak, before we go into the deep dive into the topic, I would like to give the historical context, set the context so that we understand even better. Like, see, in the past, not that businesses or rather trade didn't happen across the countries. It happened, but it happened at a very low level and then not at a scale where a particular country is expanding into other markets. It happened during colonialism, whereby the political power, the brute force, was applied to the colonies to subjugate the entire of the businesses. So that is how they never felt the heat due to the distance whatsoever in whatever form, which later after post the Second World War era, where many of the colonies became independent. Once they all became independent, they are no more at the mercy of the colonizer. So they were totally free, and they were free to engage in activities. And then initially, to start with, our post-colonial period, the entire Europe, the developed world, be it Europe, then Japan or US or Australia, they were totally engaged in their own national reconstruction. And later, their domestic markets are opened up, and they progressed tremendously, leaps and bounds within that next 30, 35 years. So they have enough domestic demand. Then came a saturation in 1980s, whereby the global MNCs, they found that unless they transcend the boundaries and enter into the newer markets, they will not capture, or rather they will not grow and give the value, or rather the benefit of wealth maximization to their stakeholders. So they set on an agenda, which we all know is called as Uruguay round of negotiations under GATT. So that is primarily to open up the markets, especially the Asian and underdeveloped and other markets. Prior to opening of the markets, the every country followed its own protectionist policies, whereby they used certain tariff and non-tariff barriers as tools to ensure that imports are not flooded into their country, and due to which there was every market was more or less insulated with a little bit of inflow of goods and services, and investments. So then came the this Uruguay round of negotiations, whereby most of the countries in the world, basically lobbied by the MNCs, they want all these countries to be opened up. So finally, it bear the fruits in 1993, whereby most of the countries, all the Bretton Woods, nations, or the signatories of United Nations, they all have agreed to this GATT, whereby they agreed that they will reduce the general tariffs, then other non-tariff barriers like quantity restrictions or anti-dumping duties, all these kind of things. So finally, once they have opened up, then came they entered into newer markets, because entering into foreign market is not an issue for MNC. So they had a big plans. They identified India, China, and Asian countries, Africa, even Latin America. They're all prospective markets where they can expand, and many of the companies have expanded. So finally, they came across a certain thing, like they understood that it's not so easy to enter into any particular market. Best example is the Star TV. Star TV entering into the Asian markets initially with a huge hope that English, being second most spoken language in Asia, may give them a huge foothold and profitability with the increase in the market share. However, it happened to be a disaster. So then came the rude, awakening that what may be the reason for such kind of a debacle by leading player. So that led to a concept called as distance still matters. Distance does not mean just geographical distance in terms of how many kilometers a particular location is. Definitely, geography plays a vital role, but it also depends on the kind of industry they are engaged into. and the kind of and there are three more additional dimensions to the distance, like as Sanjay has explained. It is the cage analysis, or rather the cage, the factors, cultural factors predominantly come out of your uh, religious differences, then social norms which are set, like for example, for Russia and even China, red is an attractive color, whereas that may not be the same with India or some other country. So then there may be people who are strongly nationalistic. They may not like anything international, and there is a lot of resistance when it comes to sharing of natural resources with other MNCs from other countries. So they used to feel that these companies are robbing their resources. So such kind of a lot of resistance these companies used to face, and they're all encapsulated very well in this cage analysis put forth by Pankaj Gimbawat. He also have given that AAA framework. It's known as AAA triangle also, which we will come at a later stage. So what are those things? That initially, to start with, the cultural difference. That is the how much similarity is your culture with the culture in which you are entering into. How much of differences are there? What kind of a difference? How those culture will impact your line of business? Like, say for example, in India, people don't like to eat beef. So beef is prohibited in Hindus. So India being a big market, if some player, say like KFC or some other MNC brand outlet, if they come into India, they may find it very difficult to sell the products which are made of beef, and also be due to different kind of eating habits. Maybe we find a lot of vegetarian population in the north, and then the non-vegetarian population in the south, and even among the non-vegetarian, again it all varies with state to state. So whenever any company, I mean any MNC brand which want to enter into the food segment, they have to take into consideration all these factors. Otherwise, if they adopt the uniform uh, strategy which they have adopted elsewhere, may not work out well. So the same thing applies even with the social norms. What kind of norms? Certain cultures may have very stringent, which are unwritten rules, which may not be said. Only when you actually come into into the market or into those space, you tend to understand what those social norms are, and at times they may be totally in conflicting nature. And then you can see in terms of viewing habits, in case of movies, some societies and cultures may take nudity as very serious offense. Some may prohibit the dances, so on and so forth. So these are all various factors which will be influencing that particular business. Then and also it all depends on what kind of uh, yeah, the what do you call ethnicity they belong to, or the kind of social networks they have with respect to the companies which are into existence. Then again it will affect differently in these all things, like any companies which are very strongly related to a particular cultural or linguistic content, like TV is specific to a particular uh, language. Say in India, maybe the local regional language TV channels may do well compared to any English channel, because English speaking people are too few in number. Even though the numbers are there, still they may prefer to go for their own native language. So this is one industry which is dependent on totally on the cultural factors. Second is related to food. Food with religious and cultural identities have a very strong connotation when it comes to the business, and it makes sense when the food chain with a similar kind of you can say either national identity or food preferences would be a better business proposition than going into divergent markets where they may not even like the taste, or they may not prefer the choices. For example, in the morning we discussed about that Disneyland in Paris. So in that they had to replace alcohol with that of wine, because the French prefer wine to alcohol, so they had to make a change, amendments. So then comes is anything, as I discussed, carrying country specific yeah, quality associations, maybe in terms of like wine, which I have discussed. So wines, or some particular cultures may like some other specific food, so that may be given more preference over the food of that MNC brand. So then comes is the second aspect is related to administrative and political distance. In this, it is all related to the as Sanjay said, it is the relationship between the colonizer and the colony. If there is such kind of a link, they naturally, it was observed that around there is 9 times more likelihood that they may engage in a business rather than otherwise. So then the political hostility, sometimes like country like India and India, Pakistan, for example, they both have political hostilities despite they sharing borders. So most of the time it becomes very difficult for both countries to engage in trade because of these political hostilities rather than otherwise. Otherwise, geographically, it may sound good for Indian businesses to enter into Pakistani market, but because of these political hostilities, naturally, it will not be a preferred destination. Then it all depends on how strong a political, and legal or financial institutions are. If they are very weak or not so robust, then naturally businesses will not thrive to the extent it thrives. In any case of inconsistent that so-called political policies or economic policies that may be affecting the companies dearly, that may impact the business in those nations. So it all depends. Like there are certain some industries in which government think that they are staples, like food, for example, food grains, or utilities like electricity, or natural resources or mining. So most often the governments may not be liking other MNCs to exploit their resources or the staples which they feel that they have to have control over it. For example, like fossil fuels, energy generation, or the oil refineries. So the countries may not prefer them to be under the control of a MNC. For example, there were in India prior to nationalization of oil refineries, there were many other countries like British Petroleum, that Burma Shell Company, then your Caltex, all these companies, they invested into oil refineries. But during, I think, in late 70s, so they were nationalized and they were taken over by the government, be it IOCL or BPCL, HPCL. So then comes is a geographical distance. In any case, it is observed that uh, geographical distance not only indicate only the physical distance between the countries. Definitely, physical distances play a major role because it would be very difficult and cumbersome to operate from a very long distance rather than conducting it otherwise. Despite the fact that we are in a global economy where the boundaries are getting blurred, but still, all said and done, operating across the countries, across the borders or continents is not a joke. It requires a lot of more than anything is the resistance from the employees to migrate to another country. Many a times they may not prefer to move out, and few may have to sacrifice a lot of things in terms of getting themselves liquidated, and they're all again it's all subjective, like it is up to the individual whether to take such kind of a decision. Then comes is the kind of access to sea and highways, or the ocean highways. They give access to something called as a global trade. So wherever the seaports or any cities which are on the oceans or seas, they will be better placed compared to cities which are interiors. And you take for example, like entire in the entire world, almost 75% to 80% population resides 100 kilometers with from the sea coast. And if you see, India may be an exception because most of our population is in the interland. But most countries, be it Europe, be it Americas or Australia, or even the China and Japan, do you find the most of the population is clustered around the sea, or coast places near to the sea coast. So then comes is how remote physically. You see, if it is a landlocked country like say Afghanistan or Central Asian republics, a Central Asian republic have huge energy resources. They were not tapped because they are not accessible through sea, and transporting the bulk products like petroleum and gas is a huge task and a burden, whereas the markets are elsewhere. They are not very much in the nearby locations. And another factor which plays an important role is differences in the climate. Similar climate, you may tend to feel comfortable, and then many a times people may not be comfortable with the climatic zones. Different extremes, either extremes, that is one. And the other thing is, engaging in countries with different climatic zones may bring in different sort of a you can say the geographical endowments. Like a cold country handling with hot country may have a different set of problems and different set of totally different dimensions. That may not be in case of this. Then you have some factors related to economic distance. And in case of geographical distance, those companies, those products which are very low in value and very bulky, they are not, they are totally at disadvantage. They prefer, because the transportation cost will be the major cost, so they prefer to trade something somewhere near to their own national boundaries, and where geographically they are near. And there are certain industries like perishable products. It may be fruit, vegetables, or food products which have very less shelf life, including milk and milk products. So they will be traded in the nearby geographical locations rather than spreading across different countries. And another thing is the perishable. Of course, apart from perishable, it is the fragile products like glass. You cannot set up a glass plant or export a glass from India to elsewhere, because longer the distances, there is high chances that they may be mishandled, and in between the entire product may be broken, leading to a lot of problems and ramifications for the companies which have invested into it. So then comes is the financial infrastructure. Any country with weak banking facilities, or the central bank being much weaker, with lack of capital markets, or you can say robust institutions, naturally people will not be interested to go and invest or do business, and rather they prefer those countries which are well established, especially in these areas. And then comes is out of the last one, it is economic distance. So different It all depends on, what is the economy in terms of GDP per capita, or you can say the consumption and disposable surpluses they have. So a country which is very poor, though it may be neighbor, we may not engage in trade. For example, Bhutan. Bhutan is a small country with very, very small GDP, with very limited disposable incomes. We don't engage in trade with it. Rather, we prefer to go to US or Europe, where the markets are bigger and the GDP is much stronger. And then, that is one reason. Then the other is different costs and quality of natural, financial, and human resources. In any case, so it all depends on the costing part. And in this, Gemawat's that AAA comes into existence. That A is related to aggregation. How much you aggregate to. It is basically. You prefer first is adaptation. You adapt to you seek to increase the revenues and the market share by actually tailoring as per the requirements of that particular market, rather than pushing the product which is usually delivered in some other countries. For example, Coke, for example, the quality of Coke in India and US is totally different. They both vary because based on the locally available materials and the taste and preferences and choices of Indians, compared to Europe and US, where the phytosanitary standards are very stringent, whereas in India it is lax. So they prefer to compromise on it, try to give at a cheaper price, whereby compromising on these aspects. Then called is the aggregation strategies. They basically focus on achieving the economies of scale or scope, as we have discussed in the previous session. Like aggregation is how much you aggregate these markets, integrate them, and have basically it is to achieve the economies of scale. The larger the scale, the better is your what do you call advantage when it comes to cost, because cost is one of the major differential criteria to enter into markets or gain major footage or get to capture the market. So then comes is the arbitrage. Arbitrage is basically to take advantage of the differences in the cost, especially between in case of this gems. They shifted their operations from high cost centers, from developing markets, to the low cost centers. And whereas the low cost markets like China, they produce goods for the larger markets like US, Europe, where they get bigger margins, and also they get a bigger price for the products which they produce. So this is the arbitrage principle which they adapt. So in nutshell, this is about this. Distance still matters. Now coming to the case study, if somebody would like to throw some light, like Falguni, you want to say?
Actually, I've not gone through, Suresh. I'm so sorry.
Okay. Anybody? Sanjay?
Somebody who has already read it.
Yeah, Sanjay read everything, so he's the right guy.
No, I have not read this. Well, I've read this, but not good enough, is what I would say.
No, it's okay. See, we are just discussing the concept. Like,
I know I'm too involved in few of the other one, so I'll mix it up.
Ketki, you can do. Ketki, you can go ahead.
Go
Sorry
ahead.
for this.
Start. Don't. I'm getting PTSD now. Pre-traumatic stress syndrome actually.
केतकी इसका क्लास करना पड़ेगा, ये क्या है?
ये क्या है?
नहीं PTSD लोगों को पोस्ट होता है, मुझे सुरेश की बातें सुन के प्री हो रहा है अभी.
अच्छा, चला, good joke. Anybody else?
Ignorance sometimes is bliss, you know,
Yeah, absolutely.
because we don't know what is this, we don't even feel it.
We will feel it straight on the 15th. So,
नहीं नहीं उतना कुछ नहीं होगा. If you are sound in basics, I don't think we'll fail any. We'll face any problem. Sudhir bhai, I think.
ये कल का केस स्टडी है ना, कल का है ना केस स्टडी.
I
कल
just
का
downloaded
Yeah,
5
Falguni.
documents which I had not even seen before.
प्रवीण, शिवकुमार, राधा कृष्णा,
But at least
मनीष भाई तो अभी तक सुना ही नहीं दिया.
Sanjay, you are
Gems,
the best now. Out of all of them, you have read at least something. So tell us.
Yeah, you can throw some light before we start.
Sanjay is all set with the camera on now.
Yeah, he's ready.
Yeah, that's okay. Camera doesn't.
No,
Please,
camera
please.
means you are all ready.
full story, is it? Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. I'll tell what I remember from what I read.
Absolutely.
So this case study is about GE Healthcare. GE Healthcare is one of the divisions within General Electric, and I think the key thinking in the case narrative that they talk about is how do they increase their presence of healthcare business, which is largely devices that they were procuring or producing. How do they increase the overall size and distribution? And in my mind, that's the large part of the case narrative that they talk about, right? In terms of how are they operating in United States, what's happening in Japan and France, what's done in India, China, and what have been the key technological trends in healthcare by itself because of the new technology coming into play, which is like digital imaging and all that stuff. And thereafter, how the entire disease management system or patient record systems are changing. And what's really happening with the compete, if you go back and look at compete, which is largely Siemens, and probably there was one more, there were two, but those were, I think, Toshiba. Those were Philips, Toshiba, yeah, those ones which typically would probably were good compete in different regions as compared to across the different regions that G healthcare system was. That's the broad case narrative I remember. Of course, I don't remember a lot of details that I should.
No, no, details are not important. Like
But the case
the
narrative
analysis
is
we made.
largely that.
Yeah, you're right.
So does the case narrative discuss on what is the Porter's five forces in the sense what are its competitors doing and vis-a-vis comparison of what are the threats and what are the opportunities for this company GL?
No, so I think in my mind, Falguni, a lot of details have been provided in terms of where and how much compete and what who is doing. But I think what is more relevant in the case narrative is two. One is the technological changes that are happening in healthcare segment altogether across the globe. That's one key narrative which is impacting or should impact the decision of GEMS, as well as their strategy of where should they manufacture and where should they and how do they put the R&D and designing system and sales processes or marketing processes across the globe, right? That's the
Absolutely.
narrative of how do they put that together and should they move to China in that sense of it. That's the question that they are asking themselves under the new stewardship of Hogan. Where and how should they strategize to get more revenues continue to grow, and is China being China, how should they attack and get into China, right? Because China has it works differently because they have not been in China. That's what it shows,
Yeah,
right?
they say when you are in China, you have to work for China. This is the,
Correct. So how do we do that? And that's where the first part of the analysis talks about how is China culturally, administratively, geographically, and economically different from the markets in which GEMS is operating. But more importantly, if in spite of those differences, and of course, the industries which are more sensitive and less sensitive to these differences, where does GEMS fit into play? And if, depending upon that fitment, do they need to take a strategy which is more of adaptation, arbitrage, or aggregation? That's the entire connotation of analysis that one needs to probably do in this case narrative. That's
Absolutely.
my brief
100%.
recollection of
You're
what
bang
I
on.
remember reading.
You're
It's a
bang
very
on.
large case study, lot of
Yeah.
data.
Yeah. Lot of data is given. Lot of data is given. So basically, everything boils down to the decision whether to go with the GE's philosophy of going global, like to have a different to shift their focus from so-called high cost centers to low cost centers, and from those low cost centers to export to the high cost centers whereby they increase their profitability. This is what in nutshell all about. And here the China in that in China for China policy or the concept that is in somehow is not in sync with the GE's strategies. So whether GE has to adapt that policy or whether they have to go for their own existing policy, and how do they rate and what do they view, whether China will be a bigger market for them, will it overtake US market and European market, or what for they will be using the China for. This is the biggest
Suresh,
question
if you
mark.
would remember what the narrative also talks about, that in Germany they were competing against
Siemens,
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 right?
right?
And at some point in time, they were able to, uh, through the kind of product that they had put into place, they were able to sell a lot more than what Siemens was selling in their own turf. Unlike how much was Siemens able to sell in US altogether. So they have done a similar situation where they dealt with German marketing perspective in a way that they were able to outsell an incumbent manufacturer of the location. But for them to deal with China is a little more different, because it's not only about selling in China, it's also about understanding the basic uh, process of how people in China think, and that's where the thinking behind is it made in China or not, etc., comes into play. For which the question that was being discussed is: should G continue to produce where they are producing and then sell in China, or should they start producing in China to sell in China, kind of a thing, right? Because then they create enough investment opportunities for people, resources, everything within China. Probably that would give them enough support to operate in China. But for
so
them to do that, they need to ensure that they're aligned from cultural perspective, and they're aligned in terms of their strategy to, adapt, as compared to do an arbitrage, which they were doing probably in most of the other countries in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And
so
again, yeah, Sudhir.
so I'm just going to just want to. I was working in healthcare GEMS from 2004 till around 2007, right? So basically, I was part of the same division which was evaluating this. So one of the things was building a strong COE and moving certain production to certain parts, which was what they were trying to do, right? And they discovered that Bangalore was a center and Beijing was another center where they're going to develop most of these COEs and have services and have some parts done and the other things. So I'm just going to, there's a whole lot of hindsight also in this, right? The one, yeah, Sanjay.
You were working with Wipro G Healthcare.
Yeah, I'm working with G Medical Systems, not Wipro G, but the other one
Got it. No,
is
no,
what.
I used to audit Wipro G Healthcare, which was a joint venture. And
Yeah,
again,
correct.
was the sales arm for every sales that was happening of those equipments in India. And that's it. So
Yeah,
that's what I
when
checked.
I joined Jekis, I was fully 100% when Jekis was part of
Correct.
GE, right? So I spent a lot of time in Milwaukee and with the product teams there, right? And we spent a lot of time with Wipro GE here, right? So I was just, so yeah, going back to the point, so they've developed this whole COE concept and started working on it. The only problem was, I mean, I'm just going to say problem because GE thought of a product, and this is the product we're going to work on, right? And this is the high end, be a CT scan or an MRI or a PET. or any of the modalities which they had. It was called, each product was called a modality. So they decided this is a product we'll work on. But when they went to China, they realized this whole China for China concept, and they started kind of localizing parts for China. So they did have some increase. Then Germany, they got a slender lead over Siemens, but Siemens was, again, they had a what you call affinity towards a German product, and so that they could never overcome, right? And the other one was, so the biggest greenfield for them was India, right? And this was in 2002, 2004. And they ignored India almost for like next 12 to 14 years. They really wouldn't focus on India, right? So when in 2000 or something, when I gone to get a scan done, right? A CT scan on a GE machine cost 20,000 rupees in Bangalore, right? But a CT scan on a Philips just cost me 5,000 rupees, right? The whole point was they made products which were like really suited for the US market and tried to sell the same products in India. While they did China for China, the biggest growth market was India. They totally lost the message on that, India is not going to pay for high-end products. And you have to look at the thing that Siemens, Philips, and India kind of started those devices in India at the same time. They were already in existence for 25, 30 years by the time 2000, and Siemens had an India presence. They had worked on an India product till around 2012 or 13 is when the first portable CT scan which came up from GE, which was totally designed for India. So if you see, this whole case study revolves around 2000. Since this group is not doing the discussion to 2002, they are all discussing about how to break down the COE model really worked, and profitability kind of was measured to the second decimal point. And in 2004, if you predicted an operating margin of 39.5% and you got an operating margin of say 37 or 38 or even 6 base 0.6 less, you had to change your job. It was internally so incentivized that if you missed your profit margin, you basically had to look for a new role within GEMS. And if you missed it like in 2 consecutive quarters, right? So you ended up leaving GE, as tough as that. So that kind of also brought in the bad behavior. And fortunately, I worked on the balance sheet for like 6 quarters. And you see, my only job was to look at all the balance sheet across the world, and every close 3 days before, you'll see all the balance sheet accounts just going up, 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 because everybody's only concerned about them reaching the profit numbers, right? So they would just book that. And because all like the R&D to sales, everything was monitored to the second decimal place. So nobody could afford to have any miss, so, right? They would start booking it to an asset or a liability, and that led to a bad behavior. At the same time, they forgot India totally. So the aviation thing, which really worked for GE, they tried to replicate that in the healthcare space for China, which also was kind of giving them good results. But the other market to tap where there was no public healthcare system which worked was India, right? And they had to kind of develop products which were suitable for nobody was going to pay 1.5 lakhs for a scanner and bring it and keep where you could from Philips or Siemens, you could get the same for 35,000 and you could do a scan for 5,000 rupees. Right. So that was kind of the biggest disconnect. Though they read the market, though we had so many people in India, just couldn't move fast enough. So it took almost 12 years. So that's kind of the hindsight, and what happened after that. So it just couldn't keep up with the competition in India with Philips and Siemens. And then it was just went down the road. But yeah, if you look at the margins were really good. Again, that was all in the European market, the growth markets, which was North America and Europe. Then even the Asia growth markets was good in Singapore, Hong Kong, and rest of Asia, but the key Southeast Asia, which was kind of India and the South Asia region, there they really failed. And I think that's probably the data is the case study is kind of alluding to that fact that the COE model seemed to be good. So how could they capitalize on it? And at the same time, they had a host of products which were more suitable for the Western market. For example, one of the CT scan in US, if you got a CT scan, it will show the temperature when you're lying down, right? That temperature seeing thing cost almost 20,000 to make. In India, I mean, if you're getting a CT scan done, why would you care about what's the temperature in the room? Do you really care? I mean, all you want is a CT scan and you walk out with that, that black thing. So your scan is red. But those are the frills which were kind of done. And again, at the same time, when they were selling the products in US, most of the insurance was 100%. There was no copay at all. So if a doctor said 7 scans, people would get all the 7 scans for a broken thumb, right? And the insurance company paid, and the employee was happy, right? So this needed more scans. But as 2007, 2008 markets crashed, people started questioning, why do you need so many scans? Then the system of a copay came up. That means there's a pressure on the machines to deliver more, or they wanted more scans for machines and they could not use all the machines, right? So that's again another thing which they didn't see it coming. They were so focused on markets outside thing, but the whole market dynamic change. What would this, which porter thing is this? I mean, I'm just trying to match it. This regulatory framework kind of started questioning, why do you need so many scans for a finger, or you just injured your toe or whatever you needed. You don't need 3-4 scans, and each scan is like, I remember I had a spine CT in US in 2012. It cost me $3,600, and after copay I still had to pay almost 2,000. I thought the flight return ticket was 1,200 and the scan was 6,000 rupees. If I could bear the pain, I would have flown to India, got the scan done, and still saved some money from what copay I did. So this started getting questioned, and the patient started paying more out of pocket. So people started trying a different solution, especially in places like New Jersey. You can go get your own scan done, and you didn't even want insurance because it was lower than your insurance money. So all these factors, I think GE Medical Systems didn't read, and that's kind of what led to the aftermath of losing market share. And finally, it came back now. Now it's a separate company. So, and this whole thing, they could think of this thing because the whole the supply chain of GE Healthcare was the strongest within GE, and the what do you call the GPC, which was where you could they manage the product costing. It was kind of a well-oiled machinery. So somebody sitting in US could just pick the parts number for a factory in Malaysia and get it almost 100% accurate on the part which would go in. Right. So that's the strength, that's the backbone internal process, which was so successful, working well. They could even think about such a elaborate scale of trying to develop a market. They thought that kind of supply chain would work everywhere. Again, once you remove the geography of North America, the supply chain is not that seamless. I mean, this is almost, we're in 2023, 20 years ago. I mean, India was good, but not as dependable supply chain as in the US or say in Europe for that matter, right? All those were some of those environmental factors which they couldn't really tame in China and India.
Yeah, plus, and also the need and requirements in India are very different, right? Just like
Correct.
healthcare awareness, healthcare cost incurred by the government, the improvement in technology and its application in the healthcare systems in India we are at least a decade behind what we typically see in the developed countries today. Even
Yeah,
today.
based on your budget, you can pick a doctor, right? If I only had 30,000 and it's not a non-threatening thing, and I would pick an hospital and a doctor where I can go afford the scan, the
Correct.
hospitalization, and
I'm saying
you
the
know,
cost is secondary part. I would say just the awareness of how healthcare is important
yes,
and the public healthcare system itself is behind. And on top of that, if you have a cost measurement of individual to incur the cost, irrespective that the in India, a large part of payments on insurance side came up to co-payment very quickly in the first 5 years after it started, at least on the medical side. There was some bit of co-payment right from, I would say, early 2000s altogether. A small amount, but it was still there, and that ensured that the patients were more careful about what kind of test and all that stuff they're going through. But I think just the awareness and evaluation of medical systems in India, or I would say China or Southeast Asia, is very different compared to what is there in US altogether. So the comparison of Western world medical systems and awareness versus what is there in India or in China is different. Of course, one is having center of excellence, and that really helped in terms of managing the product cost, which is what they used to call GPC, and hence the margins, etc. But in my mind,
Please.
you're right. I think it's also about when you go back and look at a particular market segment, how are you adapting to the market needs and requirements makes a huge difference altogether. So the product may undergo a change, yet provide some bit of need and requirements which Indian medical systems have compared to a need and requirement that may exist in US medical systems altogether. You don't need, for example, the temperature example you gave, you didn't require that in India, right? Nobody would have talked about it, but the instrument still had it, and one had to pay a price for that component in that sense of it, right? So,
yeah. And two things happened after that. I mean, one was they acquired a company, and they also were for a regulatory check when the US FDA, those guys came, they didn't open the doors immediately. So it just led to a big suspicion, though there was nothing to hide. They didn't open the doors immediately to kind of do the inspection, right? Because of which in 2004, they got slammed some penalties and they couldn't sell in certain markets. They couldn't sell that product, which is there in one of this product. Then to complicate matters, that year they acquired a biosciences company, which was more on the clinical side, like predictive healthcare, which was not really an equipment business, right? They paid more than necessary for that and acquired that, and they thought they will branch out in it. And that took so much management time, it just lost focus on this growth markets, right? Because suddenly you're trying to do predictive medicine and kind of bring predictive model that you will predict this disease is going to happen, and they kind of invested a lot of time and management. So these two events kind of derailed the whole growth expansion in the growth markets, especially Asia, right? When so much time, management time goes in managing an acquisition, which not even in really in the core business, which is the yes, it is in the healthcare space, but it's really not a medical equipment. And that's kind of, they changed the name, right? GE Health Medical Systems became GE Healthcare. But then after a long time, I think 3 years ago or something, they finally divested that. But it was painful as long as it was there, because the strategy or the identity of the company or this business, people were struggling to identify what are we? Are we a hardware manufacturing with solutions, or are we a medical, predictive biosciences kind of thing?
correct.
So that kind of confused the customers and the thing. But at the same time, our competitors didn't have that problem. They were not in all the device space, but each of the space they were operating in, they dominated it throughout. So that's kind of derailed our whole process of it becoming a world leader and other things.
Okay. Very excellent insight, Sudhir. Actually, see, I think GEMS, given the based on the course materials information,
Hmm.
see, per capita expenditure on medical devices in China and India are almost the same. They missed a great
Yeah.
opportunity because see, one when it comes to distance in terms of the geographical or cultural or economical or otherwise, it would make more sense to have it in India because India is more. See, we already have a huge English speaking base, and then to certain extent, you can say that that colonizer colony concept is still there because see, British, after all, the British are same British are also into US, right? So we
Yeah.
have that relationship, and we already had a kind of a economic ties also with them, and it's not very far off, right? China may be geographically maybe more at advantage compared to us, but otherwise, if you see the cultural distance wise, India is more nearer compared to China, and that's
Yeah.
where they made a little mistake. And then they had instead, too much focused on center of excellence in China and then Beijing, and they arm twisted the entire of policy in their favor. And I think they have yielded to it also, right, in China
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so, because they thought that cost differential is so high and it will be profitable for them in the long run. That's where they committed a mistake. And then I think maybe they might have even closed some of their factories or centers of excellences in Mexico and Europe, right? Is that so?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Japan.
Yes, Japan. Yes, Japan is. They had this. What was it? Yokohama Medical System. So they had, you know, a group of people or some dedicated customers in the hospital chains which still bought them, irrespective. They were kind of, because the other manufacturer was Toshiba, which really didn't have all the products, right?
Right.
So they didn't want to lean on Philips or Siemens. They kind of were had some allegiance to the GE models with the acquisition of one Japanese company. But again, that's really was not a growth market. Japan was like probably goes into
Japan
a
is stable.
recession.
Stable, in fact.
Yeah,
Markets are stable.
Yeah.
No
they will
growth.
not even acknowledge they're in recession, and they'll
Yeah.
take 10 years to acknowledge and 10 years to come out of it.
Yeah, that's true. And then
But
that
anyways,
market
if
is
you look
highly
at the case,
saturated, right?
but the
That
case
is,
narrative is only on China. Of course, it
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah.
talk.
Yeah, it doesn't talk about Japan. Just China
Or
is
even to that
the
extent India, because what is the issue that's been talked about is how do they
is
want to
highly.
deal with China as a market,
See, now
not
there
India
are
as a
three
market, but
issues
Japan
which
as a
we
market.
can. Yeah, Sanjay, we can discuss on three issues. I think that would be better. In any case, we know the case material, and Sudhir gave an excellent insight about the
Oh,
entire
that is
GSD.
useful because it gives us a lot
Yeah,
of understanding about what was really going on. And you're right, Sudhi. Any
yeah,
organization, when we look at the case narrative, it's not only what is happening in the case narrative is going on. There's a lot of other things happening around that impacts the case narrative where it is, right? The whole
correct.
acquisition of a predictive science organization, which they thought at that point in time would be one of the great revenue earners for them, probably ahead of time. And then there are significant regulations in the US and India. People don't even care about predictive understanding of what kind of disease they may have. Is is clearly an item which took a lot of time, and that did not probably allow them to do what they would have otherwise been able to do on the product market itself, where the products were good, right? They all they had to do is to adapt to the needs and requirements of the respective countries in which they would want to sell.
And I think there, if you see on page 14, you have the service contracts. I don't think they could really, sell the service contracts like they have anticipated. You do a 500,000, you give a 4 year service contract. So you basically book the revenue, and it's pretty good operating margin, almost 48%, 50% on that. You get those service contract, but in reality, that's not what happened in China, right? People are not going to give so much money in advance, and They wanted a local solution for the product and the thing. So one thing after the other is what the requirement was. The China for China was really uh, deeper than the, I mean, like what we are saying in India for India, it's still has so many exceptions where they don't have to do it. Finally, if you read the fine print, it's like 20% you can do. But China for China is like really double-edged sword. Once you start doing it, then there's no coming out, and then they've
Absolutely.
changed the rules of the game for GE operating there.
Even the supply chain disruptions will also be there. You
Yes,
can't take any decision to go out of it. So,
correct.
yeah, actually, there are three questions, so we can discuss one by one.
Hmm.
First is, what is the underlying logic behind the product idea, global product idea? What's the underlying logic? I think we have already discussed. And again, can you explain a GPC with the help of a triplet triangle?
What is that?
Triplet, we
Arbitrage.
have adaptation, arbitrage,
Arbitrage.
Okay.
and
GSD is all
what
arbitrage.
aggregation. You know, what is that? The core philosophy behind it. Actually, they wanted to shift their entire operations to low cost centers, whereby they supply to the global markets, so that high cost center the supply is towards the markets which give them more revenues and also profitability. So this is the basic crux behind it. It's basically the arbitrage. They wanted to take advantage of arbitrage. So this is the core philosophy, I think.
So
And I
if you
think
read the three A's, right, and they were already in a low cost country, and when they were moving to China, it was really not a low cost country. It's just the adaptability of adaptability to China.
adaptability is adapting to the local circumstances, which is not the
Not just
case.
for local, but what they had done in the low cost country was that the global supply chain had some adaptability of moving the parts from there to wherever they wanted. But when they moved that to China, they had to kind of supply to China from there, and also they realized that the supply chain is not and cannot entirely be controlled from outside China for within China. So that probably the AAA, if the first A was say 50%, then the second day
Adaptation.
was
Yeah.
second day was
Aggregation.
yeah.
Adaptation.
I mean, we all know that. I mean, now in the last few years, yes, you can aggregate is what consolidation of parts before movement, right? That means you're making it a
Aggregation
hub.
is basically taking advantage of economies of scale or economies of scope. In any case, it is there because the
Yeah,
prime
that is
idea.
there, right? That's what
Yeah.
China is known for,
Yes.
mass movement of goods and consolidation, and now they can ship it to anywhere within time. So that advantage was there. Now but then the energies went there for China, right? So
Right.
it was a benefit, but how do you actually move it out without fulfilling the local?
See, the question is related to their global product idea.
Hmm.
GPC idea. They are asking about that GPC idea.
So
So
GPC is
and then
largely
yeah, largely in any case,
no, it
arbitrage is
covers
also
all the three. So
yeah.
I'll tell you, Suresh, it covers all the three, and I'll give you a perspective. The company, when they were, and anyone who's looking at GPC is looking to procure and build in supply chain in one single location. That helps you to do three things. It gives you arbitrage when you are in low cost country. That's part one, and China was probably low cost country. It also helps you on aggregation side because the entire supply chain at one place gives you economies of scale. And it also helps, it also in this particular case required significant amount of adaptation, not from what is the good that they will sell in the market, but adaptation from the supply chain perspective to ensure everything gets into China in the way it needs to be, to ensure that they are able to produce what they have to produce. But the whole concept of GPC was to ensure there is a significant standardization of the product at lower cost,
that will help them improve their margins altogether. Out of a place which has the ability to not only service what is the number of product that they are going to do today, but of a country or a place which can expand in production capabilities beyond what they are today.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And for example, if we go back and look at an example of HP created a huge GPC in India to a large extent on several aspects, not the sales side of it, but other aspects, where a lot of things used to come in India and there was a value added, what they used to call in terminology there is ROVAC, which is what are you adding as a value in India? You only get a transfer pricing for that purposes. Everything else that's coming from outside of India goes back in terms of the cost, right? So you did not add a significant percentage in terms of profit margins in respective geographies because you only gave them the margins to the extent of additional value add that was done by the country altogether. So GPC was largely to ensure that they are able to get the advantage of aggregation, have an arbitrage because of being or continuing to being in a low cost country, yet find out a mechanics to adapt to the local country's requirement, not from the sales perspective, but from the supply chain attribute perspective.
Supply chain, even the economies or the so-called
So economies is
government
aggregation,
policies.
adaptation is from a supply chain perspective,
Yeah,
and
even
arbitrage is from a low cost
government
country perspective.
policies.
Now,
Government
as Sudhir
policies.
is saying, if the initial production itself was happening at one place and was happening in a low cost country, right? Then the economies of scale and arbitrage anyways existed in that low cost country, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And
So
Right.
again, so
what
they
led
were,
them to move to China from a low cost country? That becomes a very critical question. While they got the advantage of AAA, was there something beyond AAA because of which they decided to move to China?
there doesn't seem to be. I mean, they were just riding on the success of
But
GPC, which
but
is there in page 7 and 8.
yeah.
Success of GPC is what they thought they will replicate. But example, in India, the GBEL, right, Bharat Electronic Limited, to get to that level of efficiency, they've taken 8 years. And GE had invested in that joint venture and they could almost took 8 years. But when they went to China, it was not that easy. Every aspect they took it for granted in India and Mexico was being tested in China
China.
by either somebody or the other, or it was just not giving the same yield, right? Because you were trying to do something in China where you had a lot of resistance from the local suppliers. So they're kind of the returns in the first few years were not that promising, unlike India and other places where they're doing 20% on their capital. Here they were looking at I mean, forecasting only 10%. So there was some stress in China, which is not really laid out well here. So that could be the local factors at play, right? To answer the question, GPC model, global model, yes, work. AA is yes, but then you had some other unforeseeable things in China because they were not getting the return. They were not able to move the parts as per GE's requirements. They had to do it as per local guidelines.
So question, Suresh, is the question specific to GPC in China or is the question only to GPC? Because if
Only
the question is
GPC.
only
Only
GPC,
only with respect to
and the
GPC.
logic to have GPC is to create an economies of scale and having that work into low
No,
cost country,
in
irrespective
fact,
wherever it is to get an
yes.
Yes,
arbitrage.
No, no,
correct.
that's all fine. But mostly we have to make analysis with respect to cage because ultimately the logic we need to see when you are applying it for various different countries whether this philosophy will work or not. That
No, no,
is
understood.
better tested when you apply the cage analysis, which we already discussed.
No, so I'm saying GPC is nothing to do with cage. One part of that would definitely be cage, whether
No,
you
no,
should
no.
do it
GPC,
A low
GPC,
cost country or B low cost
GPC
country.
logic, GPC's logic is based on certain benefits they are about to get accrue in terms of AAA, which we have already discussed. But
Yeah, I
however,
think the administrative
however,
and political distance was
yes,
difficult
Very
absolutely.
high.
for the
See,
GPC to be
yes,
successful.
So they haven't taken into consideration this cage analysis. They were only assuming that entering into the newer markets may give better advantage, and and it's, moving the cost centers would definitely give them the advantage compared to their competitors, right? But
Yeah.
that is based on economic logic. But whether that logic is fitting in cage analysis, that is where, because the entire play, the play comes interplay of factors or forces come into effect only due to that cage factors. Whether that they have taken into consideration is what is to be questioned. Okay. In any case, number two is, should the global product philosophy be changed or altered to suit China market? Please identify both sides of the argument and take a position explaining the rationale behind your stand. In any case, we have already discussed,
Yeah.
right?
I'm saying that
Yes.
is where cage comes into play. That
Yeah,
while GPC was providing them the AAA benefits,
right.
when they looked at application of GPC in China, clearly because of the distance factor,
Distance. Yes,
it may exist because of political and administrative reasons, not probably because of also because of cultural in that sense of it. But
absolutely.
because of cage, if the distance was significant and if it was, whether what should have been done versus not is what probably would be the analysis that would
Right.
impact whether GPC should be moving to China or not, irrespective that it has a benefit to the organization from a profit maximization perspective.
Even we can take a stand like what should be the alternatives if we take, if not China, who else? So there we can make an analysis also. We can put, comparing with India versus Europe.
That much of information is not
Maybe,
available in the case narrative. We will not be able to do that.
no,
I'm
no,
saying if we stick to the case narrative, we will not be able to do that analysis at that
no.
point in
See,
time.
we already know the factors. The cage analysis is already given as an additional material, right? We can make use of it, identify with respect to even the case narrative also. If you see that portfolio, they have given the centers of excellence, global product company, I think exhibit number 6 is given, like Mexico, Hungary, Korea, China, India, and Israel. We can make a
Hmm.
comparison with those things and what exactly strategically fit them, so that we can make an analysis. And also they have given related to global supply chain in the exhibit 7, in which they mentioned US, Canada, they are supplying 18 plus 47 parts, whereas Mexico 360, 660, I think 360 parts. In case of Bangalore, it is 122. In case of Beijing, 117 parts. Taiwan 4, Taiwan and Korea. North Africa, it is 23. Poland 1, and EU, it is 22. So we can think of it, right? उसमें से ही we can make use of it and say what will be our argument, why we preferred a particular thing. Then we can see, we can put that cage analysis. Then what makes, see, it's open. We need not go through whatever is there in the case mat. It's okay, we got enough information, but we can make an analysis whereby we use
When we look
other
at when
analysis
we
as
look
well.
at our response, so
Yeah.
long as we keep and restrict ourselves to the case mat, it helps us
Yeah.
in deriving our ability to think in the within the case narrative altogether. In my mind, logically, when we go back and look at cage analysis, there were factors both that would have had increase in distance or decrease in distance because there were things that would have worked either ways. And the question therefore would be that if there are cultural differences, how do you work through those cultural differences to minimize them to ensure that you are able to get the benefits altogether, unless you decide to not venture into China altogether, right? But that's not the point. The point is when
Chinese
you know the
Chinese are
cage,
very strong. I think in the case mat itself, they have given an instance whereby they sold a second or the used product dumped into China, and they have totally banned, and it took a lot of time for the GE administration to negotiate with them and make them to agree to it. So that way, if you see, that resistance is also very high compared to, say, a country like India. A country like India or Mexico, where they have that advantage. Mexico being nearer to their market, the US and European market, that's where they can get derive
Yeah, but
more.
the sales market was not only US, right? So I think as they were growing,
No,
their
no.
expectation
Their
was a
expectation that
significant.
China, this Asian market would grow, that's okay. For Asian market, they can position themselves. They have had plants in Korea, Taiwan, India, China. There are four locations. So even without China, they can manage it. It's not that China is very essential for them in their GPC model. So that we can give, see, we can take our own argument, right? We can defend either way.
Yeah.
The question is, what is the rationale behind your stand? You can take your stand, you can explain it. I can take my stand, I can explain it. So it all depends on how convincing is your argument.
Who
As
is
simple.
there from Group 7 here?
Group 7,
Group
Modi.
7 I am, but Group 7 is not doing this case.
This is Group 6.
Oh, okay, who's Group 6? I mean, I meant who is
Group
doing this?
6.
Any?
Vikram?
Thanks to Group 5, because they did two.
Vikram. Yeah, Vikram is Group 5.
Kalpendra
Modi
Tha,
is
he was not there.
No, now five has a double
benefit.
not a benefit. We
Uh,
had twice. Now no more.
Liability.
No more from our side. We will be listener now.
Okay. No, you can share your thoughts, right?
Yeah, actually, I joined late and I was busy with some personal things.
Okay.
So not gone through the entire case study though.
Okay. So there is a third question, which I
Hmm.
think we can discuss it. Should GEMS be aggressively pursuing genomics and healthcare related IT opportunities in addition to or instead of China opportunity? What priorities would you suggest? Explain your reasoning carefully.
We know the answer.
You just tell. Yeah,
Sunil
tell
has
out.
already given the spoiler.
Uh, See, genomics and healthcare IT, healthcare IT, of course, genomics, when it comes to genomics, like, yeah, there are a lot of limitations to it, as I think Sudhir
No, so
also
I'm saying, yeah, there
has.
would be advantages, disadvantages, but if you look at pest analysis, the environment would have, in my mind, in 2000, 2004, particularly in US, I'm saying India and all that stuff, there is still no predicted healthcare systems that would operate because people don't even care about it. But even in US or in Western worlds, the entire predictive healthcare systems and someone who would want to continue to look at and monitor and see whether you would have an issue or not, I think that focus did not, or at least at that point in time, it was being talked about quite substantially, but there was no, I would say, there was no success, or the success probability of those businesses were not as clear. It's like what we talk about Web3 today, right? We don't know Web3 would be successful or not, but every company is trying to do Web3 because you don't know. It may be a successful model altogether. So what G did at that point in time, investing into genomics or similar health IT predicted thing, was to ensure that if that market captures or becomes a very large market, they're able to successfully get into that market altogether. So if irrespective of whether it takes my management time, blah blah blah. I'm keeping that aside. If I would be in that shoes at that point in time, not investing into that kind of a business would not be great, right? The question therefore would have been whether I should have done acquisition or should I have started something of my own directly, greenfield versus brownfield, and then what kind of cost measurement and how do we want to put the team together? Because culturally, the business and the team and the acumen required were very different compared to the business and capabilities required for producing and selling the equipment itself. So I think
Yeah,
I would go into that business, but I would not keep that business as part of this business.
Even
yeah.
That's
I
the way
mean,
I
it
would
was
go.
almost a $9.5 billion
see,
acquisition in
genomics
2004.
genomics has its own pitfalls. Number one is that it is very expensive when it comes to engagement in R&D, and you are trying to take out that particular deficit or deficient gene, or whatever the gene which is responsible for your disease or disorder. So you want to isolate it, repair it, and reinsert it. And there are so many issues related to the successes. Many a times it's a big failure, and
So, Suresh, is that what
the
you're saying based on your knowledge in 2004, or you're saying based on your knowledge in 2023?
no, based on the knowledge, of course. See,
I'm
when
telling
when
you
I wrote when I wrote
the difference
civils,
in 2000 or early
see,
2000 when we were looking into it, and I
nahi,
was
in
part
in
of
in
Wipro G team.
in
G was the largest
99,
audit with KPMG at that point in time.
right?
The
When I
thinking in my mind was there was no way a large company like G would not invest into genomics. The problem was not investing into it. The problem was the kind of money that they invested into and the entity within which the entire operating activity was put into place, because then the cultural aspect of that business versus the business that was selling equipments was not exactly the same.
totally different. They are totally different.
And
They have
they could have done it
they,
like they had be a like a sleeping partner, make a strategic investment and leave it. And as and when it grew, it can be like a healthcare related strategic investment, right? But you spending 9.5 billion was a lot of money in 2004, and finally in 2020 they sold that for like 21 billion. I don't know probably what's the return, but at least 16 years later you have doubled it. I mean, so it's not really
Fixed deposit will
thing,
be
but
better than that.
in
yeah,
fact,
it's still
see,
a positive thing, right? I mean,
If
still
they
a
would have done that
positive
kind of
thing.
fixed deposit in India, they would have made more money. Just a fixed deposit in India.
Correct. But again, 2004 ke baad aaya 2008 market crash, right? So there, this after that, it still survived as a company. So if you again take out those two things, it's still a fairly good return for a US company to kind of not having lost both the shirt and pants, but you got a cheaper
No,
shirt
no,
and pants.
which is fine. I agree. My point is
Yeah,
that in a
it just
growing
took away
market
too
like
much
that,
management time.
that's
so
all.
So
much
That's
if
the bigger issue.
management time. See, healthcare IT is okay. There may be a lot of advantages to it compared to genome. Genomics is totally a different ball game, and it involves a lot of expenditure. And also, see, the one more big problem associated with it is you have to customize as per the gene of a person. And how will you develop a medicine for a separate individual? It takes huge amount of investment, right? To invest on a particular person's
No, no,
uh,
no.
disease or
So,
a
see,
disorder.
Suresh,
I would if
that's
I
the
just
thing.
was
Yeah,
didn't know about the deal, right? I would say this, right? Genomics and everything has little bit of bordering on ethical practices and what
absolutely.
is right.
Even
And
that is
as regards healthcare system is just you do the scan and you let somebody else read it.
right.
Your skill is not reading it. Your skill is generating that report, right?
Yeah,
So it's like very binary. But the moment you get into genomics, then you have to do testing, and there have to be ethical practices, and how you do that can result in different answers, or it can be like
absolutely,
you ignore
absolutely.
certain things. So based on that, it just gives a different set of behavior. So I would say no without knowing what happened. With these parameters, I would say no, I don't want to do a investment in genomics or any of the
You're saying the risk,
non-equipment business.
the
The
risk.
healthcare IT is okay, right? Healthcare IT is not an invasive kind of a thing. It's a non-invasive. It's basically generating a data and capturing it in much efficient and a cheaper way. I think that's okay.
But
But
data is still not like, read it in a binary way, right? You can read
No,
it
you can't.
the
That is
way you
where the
want
issue.
the customer, the way you want the customer to read it, or the way you want to match an assumption you've already made, you'll read the data in that way, right? It's like searching in Google. Is Suresh a good person? If you Google in Google, it'll say he is not. If you say he's a bad person, he'll say yes. It'll validate your questioning. So the data business, if they use, people would twist the answers to their advantage, right? So that's why.
see, you will be consolidating the healthcare information and by use it better, right? You can use the customer
Yeah, but
profiling and
that's where
everything.
predictability would come into play. While it's not genomics, but predictability would still come into play, and predictability will
Yes,
have its own, I would say, implications in terms of how much probabilities are associated to what's been predicted altogether, right?
Plus B2C, genomics would
Yeah,
be
yeah.
B2C. And we are in B2B. Why just switch over? We are selling machines to hospitals and clinics, right? Then they sell the imaging services to customers. Why should we deal with the
Customer.
lower B2C, right? So those two reasons I would give and say not do it.
okay. So, will you go
I
for
mean, we are
China
not in
opportunity?
group. What?
Would you focus on China opportunity?
Yeah, I would make it work. I mean, I would. China was shifting to the manufacturing giant in those days. So, for example, I don't know if the material talks about, but the aviation division of GE had already, achieved some success with the China manufacturing. They had met the local manufacturing. They had also met that all those parts which were being made, which could be fit into all the parts anywhere. They had already achieved some success on that.
Right,
So they had an example. So, but they didn't have the complexity of the healthcare industry, which was a little more regulated than aviation. For the argument, let's agree, it's more regulated than aviation.
Yeah,
so
because it
what
directly impacts
priorities
human life,
would
right?
you
So not
suggest?
not exactly the same.
What should be the priority for GEMS?
If they are making China for China, then they may as well localize a product to come with a market-based solution, rather than you have a product which sells and you want to make the same product for a lower cost. Try to make a solution for the local market, which kind of will be a different story
Yeah,
altogether.
so adaptation is something which they need to be more looking into. That not only for China, I'm saying generally across whichever locations they want to be in. That would help. While the GPC will help economies of scale and arbitrage, I think adaptation of where are you selling to the products will help you ensure better market share altogether. That's where you will get a better market share with a good profitability.
Right.
So yeah, I would also believe that entering into China with whatever is required to be done to manage the differences or reduce the differences would be essential.
You're right.
And on the other question, I think my view would be that I would still be a strategic investor for sure in a business like genomics or IT healthcare, because you don't know what will happen to that kind of a business altogether in future. When I go back and look at it in 2003, 2004, in terms of how it was being talked about in countries like US and Western world. If you ask me today, I would say no. But I'm just keeping myself in 2003, 2004. I would still do. I may not invest such large amounts, but not having a foot in the door would mean that if that industry was to grow up, I would not be able to catch up at all.
I
That's the
think
way
Yeah.
I do.
I think it's a question of how much you invest what is your risk appetite, and if it is a risky business, you should not invest, do a big bang investment.
Correct.
Gradually increase your investment based on the profitability. I think that's how it should be.
Absolutely. So I think more or less we have covered almost entire of the case study. So nice that you guys have given good inputs, especially Sanjay and Sudhir. So thanks for giving inputs. So again, we will meet on Tuesday, right? Will it be okay? Tuesday, 8:30 or 9:30 to 11:30. Again, the same time.
We'll see, Suresh. I'm not fully sure
Yeah.
how my calendar looks like because for me it's absolutely during the day.
Right.
8:30 is like 3 o'clock afternoon time. If I
No, no,
can, I will.
not 8:30, 9:30.
So that's equally middle of the day. 4 baje.
Uh, in any case, Sudhir, would you be joining?
And
Last
when?
case. Yeah, in any case, Sanjay has to come, right? Because they will be explaining that case study.
Sandeep can explain everything. He's on top of it.
Deep can, but it would be better if you are there. So
It's no
anyway,
issue.
let's meet on Tuesday.
I'm
That
not
will
sure.
be
I'll
the
see because it
last,
all depends upon if there's anything that comes up.
right?
During the days, it becomes very difficult.
So that would be the last concept we will be discussing. After that, our entire preparation for exam is over. So
Correct.
we can have, if at all anybody wish, we can have some small sessions whereby we discuss on specific topics.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good night.
Chalo, good
Good
night.
night,
Good
Sudesh.
night,
Good night.
everybody.
Good night. All.
Yeah.
Good night,
Good
Sudesh.
night, all.
Good night,
Good night.
Sanjay.
Good night.
Good night,
Good night.
Praveen. Bye. Bye, Suresh. Thank you.